Hi, you're listening to Behind the Bib podcast with Lisa Watkins. Real talk for every runner. So today I'm talking to Stephanie Dunlap. And is it Steph or do you go by Stephanie?
That's actually really funny because my husband, when I first started saying my name was Steph Dunlap on the socials, he said, no, only I can call you Steph. So really either one, Steph, Stephanie.
Okay, well, I don't want to make your husband mad, so I'm going to go with Stephanie. So I've got Stephanie Dunlap here, and I followed Stephanie for a while, at least, I don't know, it's been over a year, maybe a couple of years that I've followed you in all of your pacing through all of the different marathons. And I love the message that you have that every runner counts. And so she recently posted a video on Instagram, or a reel, I guess it was on Instagram, about an experience she had with a 6 hour. You usually pace like around 6 hour marathons, right? And so you posted a reel about pacing a specific marathon recently. It was like in Palm Desert, California, out in California, right? And it just, I don't know, it really touched me. And I think you got a lot of response from that. And I wanted to talk to you about it too, because that is exactly the stuff that I want to talk about on this podcast. So first, welcome to Behind the Bib. I know that I'm fairly new and I'm like real small, but I hope to make a difference in my community here. Okay, with that, my first question to you is, so how did you start running, and then how did you start pacing marathons?
I love that question because I used to always be someone who would say, this body doesn't run. I don't think I even knew what a marathon was when I stood on the sidelines of my first marathon cheering on some friends in 2011. But I stood on the sidelines about mile 20 or so. And I was so inspired and shocked and amazed that, wait a minute, these people had just run 20 miles and they weren't yet done. But seeing all these people of like different ages, different ethnicities, different sizes running this marathon, I was so inspired that I changed that my body doesn't run mentality to why not me? Why can't I be one of those people? So that was March of 2011. That same marathon I actually ran as my first marathon that following year. March 4th, 2012 was my very first marathon. So I like to say that I went from 0 to 26.2 miles in a year. And
that is major.
Yeah, that was really a major thing and something I'm very proud of. And so that was, March 4th, 2012, officially became a marathoner. And to date, at the recording of this podcast, I have run 51 full marathons.
Oh my gosh, 51. I was going to ask you, like, how many total have you done? So what was your first one? What was the first, like, out of the box marathon? The one in 2012. Which one was that?
Yeah, that was the Lala Marathon in Torreon, Coahuila, Mexico. So it was called the Lala Marathon. If that's a brand of a like milk, I believe. I was actually there teaching a third grade at an international school. So my teaching contract there was for 2 years. So my first year contract was when I observed the marathon, and then that following year was when I ran the marathon.
Oh, super cool. So was the course, it was in Mexico, and they have lots of different kinds of terrains, just like, the United States does. So what was the terrain like? Was it like really hilly, or was it just rolling, or was it a flat course? Do you remember the course at all?
Yeah, I'm like trying to remember. I think what keeps me coming back for more with marathons is like I tend to forget the pain quickly.
You're like, just blank. you're like, that was so awful. Wait, was it? And then it just sets in. It's like childbirth, where it's like in the middle of it, or like immediately after, you're like, I'm never doing that again. Never, ever. And then it starts to just fade. And you're like, wow, that was actually pretty, so I really did something. And so you said 51, so you haven't forgotten at all. 51, that's a lot of marathons to pace. And did you always pace like the 6 hour kind of time mark?
So in 2012 was my first marathon, and then I didn't start pacing until 2016. So 4 years later, I got on Instagram and like the running community. That's where I found Instagram running community. That's where I mainly post about, and I'm found under Run Strong Run, which comes from my time of learning in Mexico because I love to arm wrestle. And in Mexico, everywhere we went, I would arm wrestle everyone and anyone. I was in my first official
Oh,
arm
that's
wrestling.
hilarious. I
I was
love that.
I was in my first official arm wrestling tournament actually in Mexico. So people then gave me the name Corre Fuerte Corre, which means run strong run. And so that's actually where the term run strong run comes from, was my time in Mexico and my love of arm wrestling. But over the years, it's
Oh
of
my
course
God.
evolved to mean something more, because also crossing that first finish line of my marathon in 2012, I also was celebrating coming out of an abusive marriage and like finding my inner strength, and like,
Mhm.
this is me, this is what I'm capable of doing. I also am a person of faith, so
Mhm.
through God, I actually had Philippians 4:13 right on my arm, which just says I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So it's truly about like finding that inner strength, that spiritual strength,
Mhm.
that physical strength to complete this marathon. That's what Run Strong Run means to me. It's so much more than just. Anyways, it's
No,
hard to
this is the
embody
exact,
so much.
I know this is the exact conversations that I want to have with people, because it is, once you start talking to people, it's not just about the running. It's
Mhm.
not just about putting on the shoes. It's not just about the 5K or the 10K or the half or the full.
Mhm.
I mean, it becomes so much more to people. And I love hearing those stories. And I'm going to need you to like spell it out for the Spanish translation for the Run Strong Run. I'll put that like on the screen or whatever, because I love that. Arm wrestling tournaments. Holy cow. That is so great. That really is. That is so great. And I love hearing about the stories about, because it's just a thread that I keep hearing, why people run, why people come back. You know, they start for one reason, maybe, but then they continue doing it for a completely different reason. And then you get out there and you have almost these spiritual experiences. I don't know if you have, but I have, where you're almost brought to your knees with gratitude of all of the women, all of the people in your life, the blessings that you have that are surrounding you. Like sometimes I call it in my head, I'm going to church, because that's like, that's where I get so much out there. And I know so many other people do as well. And so I love hearing those stories about that. Okay, so let's talk about the clip that I showed, or not showed, but the one that I saw, the reel about the recent one, because you paced for a 6 hour pace group, right? And something happened. Or do you want to talk about that a little bit? Like, what was the race, and then kind of where it went?
Yeah, so the race you're referring to is the USA. Well, actually, the whole branch is called USA Half Marathon.
Okay.
Um, and so they really specialize more in half marathons, but they actually offer one full marathon in their series of races, and that's in Palm Desert, California. So that's where I
Uh,
went to
okay.
pace the 6 hours for them. Because I have done another race for them in Key West, Florida in February of 2024. I was the half marathon sweeper, which that was
Mhm.
all, that's a whole other another story to tell. But so I paced 6 hours for this full marathon just a couple weeks ago at the time of the recording of this podcast. And unfortunately, actually, the race was supposed to take place 2 weeks prior, but just a few days
Oh.
before that race, it was postponed by 2 weeks because of the wildfires in Southern
Mhm.
California.
Mhm.
And so, because of those wildfires, some resources were taken away from the race. And so they had to postpone it. So
Understandable.
the race was actually very,
Understandable.
very small because a lot of people who had signed up for that race were not able to run it. Now, the race organizers were really generous, and they allowed people to run it virtually to still get their swag. And they also gave us a free entry that we could use in the future for any of their
Oh,
races.
that's
So
great.
that was handled really well because I know it was out of their control.
Yeah,
But
that's great.
because of that, this full marathon had, are you ready to know the total number of runners?
Yeah, how many did you have? Oh,
And the whole full marathon field, there were less than 35 runners.
oh, that's like, I was not even close in my head to that number.
Right.
I was thinking, well, because maybe it would be a few thousand and then it would scale down. So I was thinking hundreds at this point.
Yeah.
So
No. So
30,
on
wow.
race day, there were about 400 half marathoners and 30 full marathoners. So in total, less than 500 runners out on course. And how the course was designed, or how it is currently, which I don't know if it was like this in the past or if it will be like this in the future, but
Yeah.
when I ran it, we did an out and back for the first half, which meant then for the second half was the same out and back. So we
Yeah.
ran
Yeah.
out back, which
Oh,
is not necessarily my favorite
I hate that
run.
kind of race.
It's not very fun. But it's great. It's great for me because it means I get to capture pictures and videos of all the other pace groups because
Okay, I get that. Yeah.
yeah. So that
Okay,
part
okay.
is
You made
fun.
it. You made it good. You made something good out of it. But
So
man, that's rough.
when I went to the expo the day before the race, there was a lady there who was volunteering. Her name's Dawn, and Dawn had been messaging me on Instagram. She was running her first full marathon there at the Palm Desert Women's
Okay.
Marathon. So she was like, "Oh my goodness, Stephanie, I cannot wait to run with you." So I was
Oh,
very confident going into race day because I was like, well, at least I'm going to have someone with me. Like all the
yeah.
other pacers were like, I don't even know if I'm going to have anyone with me, but I was confident that I was going to have Dawn
I'm
with
gonna
me.
have Dawn.
Yep.
Dawn's gonna be there.
And so sure enough, Dawn and I started the race together and as we're going through the race, we were doing 90-second run, 90-second walk intervals. So
Okay.
running 90 seconds at about
Mhm.
12:40 pace per mile and walking 90 seconds about a 15-minute pace per mile. And we were chit-chatting and stuff, and Dawn actually can run faster than 6 hours. And so I was like, we were talking about her strategy of like when she's gonna like pick up
Uh-huh.
the pace,
Just
so
take
this was
off.
her
Yeah.
very first full marathon, and she actually ran a negative split marathon, which means her second half was faster than her first half.
Really?
So yes,
That's
so
fantastic.
I know.
Go Dawn.
So as the race is going on, in my head, I'm trying to like calculate, okay, what's going to happen to the roads? Because we were on basically a 4-lane road, and they
Mhm.
had one lane, or I guess 2 lanes on both sides, so 2-lane road, I guess. And so they had the one lane blocked off for us, and then
Mhm.
there was traffic still moving on that other lane. And
Okay.
so in my head, since I've done this before, I've been pacing since 2016, almost 10 years.
Yeah, that's a
I
while.
know that unfortunately, in the back of the pack, sometimes roads are open. Sometimes we're told to
Yeah.
move to the sidewalk. So these
Yeah.
kind of things I was already preparing myself for.
Yeah.
Oh, and I also need to mention that the day before the race, when I go to pick up my stuff at the expo and meet
Uh-huh.
Dawn for the first time in person,
Uh-huh.
we were also told that the race was pushed back half an hour. So it means it was supposed to start at 6:30, but then it was started at 7.
Ooh.
And so, yeah, that's right. Like, yuck. For a full marathon, I want to start earlier, not later.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and so then the road signs on the road said that expect traffic delays, marathon event from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. So if you think of that from 6 to 12,
7.
that's 6 hours.
7 to
But
12 though.
we didn't start at 6. We started at 7, which then
Yeah.
from 7 to 12 is 5 hours.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew that we were going to
Ooh.
be facing something at the end, but I
Mhm.
didn't know what. So
Yeah.
it came to be that at about mile 18, when we went to turn around to return back
Mhm.
to the finish line, we were told to move to the sidewalk. But the cones were still out, traffic was still blocked, but we were still told to move to the sidewalk. And now that part of the sidewalk was kind of like curving and stuff. And anyways, at that moment in time, that was 11:20 a.m. So I remember looking at my watch thinking, okay, it's not even at 12 o'clock yet, and they're telling us to move to the sidewalk. So at that time, I had Dawn with me, and then a little bit ahead of me, I had,
7 minutes.
I didn't know the runner's name at the time, but I now know that it's Dylan. So
Yeah, I remember Dylan. I remember you showed Dylan in your reels a couple of times. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, it's because
So
it's her second marathon,
right.
right?
Yep. Good
Okay.
memory. So I had Dylan ahead of me, just maybe like a couple hundred yards. And then I had Dawn with me. And also, Dawn was again running that negative split. So
Yeah.
Dawn was actually running faster than a 6 hour marathon. So that's the other thing I had to take in consideration in my mind, trying to calculate during this marathon is, do I keep up with Dawn or do I hold my 6 hour pace? Because behind me, I also had the sweeper and one runner with the sweeper. So the
Okay.
sweeper's name is Carol. So usually when I pace with On Pace Race, which is who I mostly pace with now, they pace races all over the country. And if you are listening to this and you want to become a pacer, you can go to
Yeah, I may talk
onpace.com.
onpacerace.com.
onpacerace.com. Yep.
Okay, I may talk to you about that because it looks really great,
I
actually.
love pacing. Oh my goodness. But I mean, On Pace Race is amazing. So I will gladly talk about them anytime. But so I knew I had the sweeper behind me and she had one runner with her because even as a pacer, how it works is even if no one's with you, you usually have to hold your time because you never know who you might catch up with or you never know who like has you in their eyesight and you don't want to go too fast for those people.
Yeah.
But
I've done it.
because there was only one person behind me and I already knew that we were against the clock, really. I decided to keep up with Dawn. So at that point, when we were told to move to the sidewalk, we were actually running about a 5:50 marathon. Like, so we were like 10 minutes of pace.
Yeah.
We're told to move the sidewalk. When we're on our way back, I see the sweeper and the runner she's with. They haven't yet turned around yet. So they're about like 30 or so minutes behind us. So we're told to move the sidewalk. There were some parts of the road that didn't even have a sidewalk.
I saw that. In the road, yeah,
we're just in the road. And so again, I didn't know what they were going to tell us. Were they going to pick us up and not let us continue?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, this is not going to happen. I'm not going to allow Dawn, who this is her first marathon. Now, mind you, they've paid like $200, if not more, dollars to run this marathon.
Plus travel.
Plus traveling, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to allow them to pick up Dawn and not allow Dawn to finish her first marathon. So I was like already playing in my head how that scenario is going to work out. Well, fortunately, we were able to continue on the race and we were able to finish. Dawn actually ended up finishing a little ahead of me and I caught up to Dylan and Dylan and I finished together. Yay! But my time was like 5 hours, 15 minutes and like 22 seconds or something like that. And sadly, the sweeper behind me and the runner, when they reached that like final turnaround point, they were told they could not continue and they were taken by vehicle to the finish line.
Really? Was the runner that was with the sweeper? Did you say that it was her first marathon or their first marathon? I don't
think it was her first because I think she was like a little bit older, like maybe even 70s, 80s or so.
But wow,
so
showing up and doing that.
Yeah, I think she's done mini marathons, but still, I mean, she paid for this race. And I also feel bad for the sweeper because she traveled to sweep this race and was not able to finish, not able to get the finish swag and
the medal and everything. But she was on pace, right? So she was behind you. Wow. That's really hard. How did the runners feel out there? Like how did Dylan and Dawn, how did they react? Were they just thankful? Was it a little tainted? I mean, that would be hard.
Yeah, I definitely think tainted for sure. Dawn actually, since that marathon just a couple of weeks ago, she since has run the Disneyland half marathon. Oh, cool. And she was like, wow, such a different experience for like the back of the pack of that Disneyland half marathon, which I don't want to badmouth the race organization. Because again, I get it. It's really hard that they had to postpone their race for 2 weeks. I totally imagine that's very difficult for the race and the volunteers and just it affects many different people and the city officials and the closing of the roads and the traffic and everything that had planned for now is shifting by 2 weeks. But so yes, at the Disneyland half marathon, I'm sure there were thousands and thousands of runners, whereas here we're looking at less than 500.
Yeah.
But the part that is hard is like those less than 500 people still paid, just like you said, to travel to run this race and they're expecting to get everything that they're promised.
Yeah, right. And then, I mean, when you're training for a marathon and maybe people that are listening to this don't train for races at all, or maybe they're training for their first 5K, but when you're training for a marathon, you're doing 16, 18, 20 weeks of training. So it's nearly half a year. It's like 6 months of training. And you give up, dinners with your family for, runs during the week and strength training sessions. And then the Saturday or Sunday morning long runs that get longer and longer and longer and longer. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of fuel and it's a lot of fueling for the race. And there's a lot, if you do it, there's a lot that goes into preparing for your marathon, right? And so if they showed up thinking and they did their homework, right? It's one thing to show up to a marathon, and which I have done, I'll admit, and been like, oh crap, I'm gonna be tight on the cutoff, right? And just because I didn't do my homework. But if you've done your homework, you're like 7 hours. Cool. I've got that, right? I'm an hour ahead of that. And then they back it up. That's really hard because even then, if you're a back of the pack, or I'm just going to say a back of the pack runner, because I don't think it's the same with middle of the pack, but with a back of the pack runner, you've done so much training, you're already a little nervous, right? At least until you get to that halfway point or a little bit more of the halfway point when you're like, okay, I've got it. I've got it. I can kind of like relax now into my run, because up until then, you're a little nervous because you don't want to be picked up and you don't want to have gone through all of that to not finish. And I know that sometimes there are people that are just, they either get injured or they something happens. Everybody has a bad race day, right? Okay, get in the bus. It's fine. You'll have another race day, right? But to change the start time, did they explain why they shifted it back so long? Like, that's a long time to shift a start, right? And not give it like an early start option, maybe, if you knew that you needed the full 6 hours or more, right? They didn't give an early start option for those folks or anything.
There was no early start option, and I did not hear a clear. I mean, my only communication was from the volunteers at the expo, and according to them, it was due to safety concerns.
Oh, okay. Wow. That was really hard. So when the people at the back, so you said it was Dawn and Dylan, right? They finished and they got their medal and they were okay, right? But it was the sweeper and the lady that was at the. But even in my head, I'm like, that's the sweeper. I have to stay one step in front of them.
Right.
That's it. Like, when it comes down to it, they are the sweeper. They come in last. That's their job. Is to be the last person on the course. One step in front of them and you're good. I haven't heard of a race that picked up a sweeper before. Maybe that's just like, maybe I just haven't done enough and I haven't seen them pick up sweepers, but I don't think, I haven't heard of that.
So I've served as sweeper now a couple of times. It's not my favorite position because with on-pace race to sweep, it means you're with the last runner regardless of their time. Usually that's what the sweeper position means.
Okay.
So
okay.
I actually have looked at the race website of this race that we ran, and there nowhere did I find on the race website did it state the cutoff time. But if they agreed to have a 6-hour pacer and a sweeper, my guess is 6 hours was the cutoff. So that sweeper, I mean, was beyond that 6-hour cutoff.
Okay.
But again, I don't know if that was the cutoff time. And then here's the thing too, like when they told us to move to the sidewalk and when I'm 10 minutes ahead of pace, that should not have been the case, that they told us
they
to move to the sidewalk. And then here's my other thing I wanted to say about being a sweeper. So why it's not really my favorite is we go into the race not knowing how long you're going to be out there, because sometimes sweepers can be out there for 8-9 hours, and that can be very difficult just physically, because I mean, like, even for myself, like pacing 6 hours, I'm like, I don't want another gel, I don't want another chew, like I want some real out there.
It's awful.
Plus the time in the starting corrals, it's like, I want a sandwich, I want pizza, I want a hamburger, like I want to chew something. And I think this is the thing I want to touch upon too, is about often being that 6-hour pace position. When you get to the finish line, I have to tell my runners, I don't know what's going to be waiting for us at that finish line. Will there be any post-race refreshments, whether that's beer or at this race it was supposed to be mimosas? Will there be any food? So, and sadly, when we got to the finish line, everything was packed up. We did get our medals, but there were no mimosas, there was no breakfast, and those were the things that were advertised for this race because it was supposed to be a luxury race experience.
That absolutely breaks my heart. That breaks my heart. And so
And then get this, the 4:15 full marathon pacer came through and also didn't have mimosas. They were there. The 4:15 pacer was told that they were out. And so she finished an hour and a half in front of me.
See, okay, because I was going to ask that, like, what did the aid? So if they were moving you ahead of schedule, way ahead of the schedule, if they were moving you, and then what did the aid look like on the course? Was there any water on the course? Was there any gels left? If they were going to provide that, I don't know if they provided that to begin with, but that's a pet peeve of mine as well.
Yeah, usually marathons will have some sort of gel or chew offered on course.
Mhm.
There was no gel or chew anywhere on this course. They did have aid stations, and the aid stations were well stocked with water and an electrolyte. And we did have aid stations throughout our whole time out there. So that was good.
Okay, that's
The
good.
final aid stations had it, but no volunteers, which I understand too. Like 6 hours out there for volunteers is a lot
I
too.
understand.
And so the volunteers just left everything up for us to grab, which is totally okay.
Yeah.
Again, like I know too that it was just three of us out there. I mean, we did have a couple people who finished around like the 5.5 hour mark, so they only finished like 20 minutes ahead of us. But when you're still looking at like less than 10 people with, I mean, because again, there's only like 30 total full marathoners. So I understand like it's not very many people, but here's the thing, like you can't have a race and you can't promise X, Y, and Z for race participants and not give race participants X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Like if they said there's going to be mimosas at the finish line, then the last finisher needs to have a mimosa.
Yep.
You know, if that's part of the package of the race, and they have said, you know, a luxury race experience, which I mean, granted, it's a whole different experience, right? And so you base your expectations on how the race is like. Hang on, your video. Okay, there. Your video paused for a second. I thought we lost connection, but you have to set expectations, right? And so when you go into a race, you know what to expect. We did the Every Woman's Marathon in Savannah last year, and boy, they built that way, way up. And let me tell you, that race delivered on every single promise they made. And I'm going to do, if not one, but 2 episodes on it, because I've never done a race that has done everything from the start to the finish. There was one little hiccup with the expo, but from the start to the finish, it was spectacular. Never done one like it. And and as soon as it opens, the registration opens this year, I said, I did it with my running buddy, and I said, nope, that's like, I'm going to do one more with you, and then that's it. But we didn't even give it the like forget time, you know, where you're like in the car ride on the way home, you're like, nope, that was awful, I'm never doing it again. It was walking out of the race. When can we sign up for next year? We would have signed up then. That's how good it was. Right. And so the people that this was their first race experience, would you come back? Like this incredible benefit that we have experienced because we have these good experience, and it's like a self, building snowball, because you build good experience and you have a little bad experience, and you keep building on it though. But if it was their first one, would they come back?
Right.
I don't know if they would. Right. I don't know if I would have. I've been like, this is awful. Like this is awful. Were you able to talk to the race director or any of the race, like besides the volunteers, anybody for the race? Did they have anything to say? Have they reached out to you? No, nothing. Zero, zilch, nada. Okay. That's too bad.
Which again, like I don't want to like badmouth them because I have to be like a little
I understand. Yeah.
As a pacer, like this organization has hired On Pace Race, who I pace with, to provide pacers for them. And so like I appreciate that we were there able to pace this race. And like I said, I've paced other races for them. Yeah. But I hope that they would lean into our feedback as pacers, because we are experienced marathoners and we can see. Because another thing that was really troubling is there was no medical aid on the course anywhere. And that is really
concerning. Wow. Not one med tent?
No.
Oh, wow. What was the porta pot situation like? I know it's kind of weird to.
Yeah, that was also not good because like Dawn needed to go to the bathroom on our first out and back. And we saw like one porta potty like at mile like 2 or so, and then another porta potty like maybe at mile 3 or 4. Like they were pretty close back to
Close
back.
together. Yeah.
But then we had to go out and then back. So there was like a span of, I'd say like 7 or 8 miles of nothing.
Mhm.
And so she was like, man, I really missed my opportunity to go at
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
so there were like 2 porta potties.
Oh, okay. Wow. I just got a little brief snippet on Instagram when I reached out to you. I was like, wow, that's really not great. And I know other runners who have had to finish on the sidewalk or if they have to open the roads, but, and it's never good, right? And one of the things that I just want people to know or race directors to know. And granted, I know directing a race is hard. They like, a lot of the small races, they have a small group of really dedicated people that work really hard to put on races. It's a tough job. They don't make any money at it. It's a labor of love. It's a passion project. They do it because they love the running community. They see how much this helps everyone, right? And they have pressures too. They have pressures of, the cities that want to open the roads, and then they have to balance, security with covering security costs with how much they actually can charge for the race and aid at the end. But if you advertise one thing, you have to you got to do those things, right? And for every runner, because just like your Instagram says all the time, is every runner counts, right?
That's right. All runners count.
Yeah, all runners count. Is that the thing? Because
Yes.
I hear, okay, all runners count is what you say. And I hear it as every runner counts. That's funny, actually. So let's talk about your next race, right?
Yeah.
What's your next pacing experience going to be?
Yeah. So in 2024, I ran 14 full marathons.
Oh
11 of those were pacing.
That's more than one a month.
So I paced 11 full marathons in 2024 and raced 3. And then in 2025, it's going to be a little bit of a slower year, but coming no full marathons in the month of February. I have one half marathon that I'm pacing at the end of this month, just locally here.
Uh-huh.
And then in March, I'm pacing 3 full marathons. I'm pacing first the Napa Valley Marathon, the 550 group. Then I'm an unofficial pacer for the LA Marathon. What I see online is they have a 5:45 pace group and a 6-hour pace group, and I'm going to be the 5:50 pace group.
Okay.
I've already designed my own pacing sign. It's going to say run 5:50, and that's 13:20 pace per mile. We'll be using run walk intervals, probably run 2 minutes, walk 1 minute, and it's going to say all runners count. And so Napa Valley 5:50, LA Marathon 5:50, and then Oakland Marathon in March for 6 hours. And then April will be back to Big Sur to pace to be the sweeper for Big Sur, which sweeper looks a little different for Big Sur because they hold a strict 6-hour cutoff, and it's very well communicated to runners ahead of time. And then throughout the course there are mile markers that say you need to be at this 18 mile marker at 11:20 a.m. and if you're not, you're going to be picked up and taken to the finish line, and that's well communicated to runners.
You communicate that, cool. Runners should expect that. That's like, do your homework, understand what is the expectations that you have to do. Like, look at the pace requirements, look at the cutoff times, be realistic on what you have done, especially in your long runs. Like, I know I'm even guilty of this. I'm sorry, my dog came in here, and so you see this tail down here wagon. See, there she is. She's a 70-pound Bernie doodle, and she's a big old she's a big old fluff bucket. But I have been guilty of it myself too, where I'll go into a race and I'm like, oh, I could shave 15 minutes off of that. And you're like, no, you need to what you're wanting to do for your race. And so be realistic, right? Don't set unrealistic race expectations. Because if you've ran a 5:50 marathon for 12 marathons, and I know not many have a 5-hour cutoff time, and it has a 5-hour cutoff time, and you have never once run less than a 5:50 or a 5:30, then you just need to be realistic, right? So you need to do your homework because it protects you and from having a bad experience, right? So I do think you have to do your homework. However, I do think if you do all of the things and you have set your expectations and you are like well within the advertised pace requirements and cutoff times and stuff like that, then all of the things should be there, right? Including the finish line, the aid on the course, especially for marathons, if they've got gummies or goos or whatever their marathon, energy is. And then at the end, somebody to hand you the medal because by golly, you just ran 26.22 and you deserve it, right? It's hard stuff regardless. What do you think that race directors can do better? Like when it comes to races like this or just experiences like this, right? How can they prevent them from happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely to survey racers would probably be one thing, race directors, when they provide those post-run surveys, like truly dive into those survey results and hear from all runners. And that means from the front of the pack to the back of the pack, and truly understand and realize that when one person pays a race registration fee and a race is promising X, Y, and Z, all runners are deserving of X, Y, and Z, regardless of when they cross that finish line. And so do whatever you need to do to ensure that all runners receive X, Y, and Z at the finish line. I think it's just not okay to have everything packed up before that last person crosses that finish line. If you have a 6-hour cutoff, everything should be well stocked, and people should be there ready to greet those people within that cutoff time. Yeah. And I understand that's difficult for volunteers. And so maybe have 2 volunteer sessions where you have some of the first half and some of the second half, or whatever you need to do. But listen to all of your runners, because if you want to have a successful race, then you're going to be valuing everyone from the front of the pack to the back of the pack. And that's why, Lisa, you and I exist in this world, in this community, to loudly proclaim that all runners count, all runners are deserving of being celebrated, because you're right, whether you're running a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon, a full marathon, all of that is difficult and it should be celebrated. So I'm celebrating all Dawn and Dylan, who rocked it out there, 26.2 miles in the midst of adversity. We overcame and we reached that finish line. And so I'm so extremely proud and honored to have shared those miles with them.
That's wonderful. Well, I love following you. I love following all of the different races that you pace. I am going to look up, who did you say the pacer? I tried to write it down. On pace race, right? That's the pacing.
On pace race.
Okay. Yeah, I'll check them out. I'm pacing my first this June. So, and I probably need to talk to you because I'm a sweeper for that race. And I was a little for me, I was worried because I'm like, well, I don't want to sign up to pace, too fast, right? Because I'm certainly don't want to hold anybody back. And I'm a little I'm not as consistent on my intervals as I want to be, and I hope to get there. I think you're probably spot on. I'm not. I've kind of got some variation in it, and I'm trying to do better. But I thought, well, sweeper, it's just I can do that, right? I know I can be the last. But I need to talk to you because I didn't think about, the last might mean, it just depends on how long the race goes, right? The last might be a while. So I need to talk to you about that. Okay, so I want to get, I'm sorry, dog's back. So final thoughts from you, and then what I'd like to do with everybody is like one piece of advice out there, and it can be for a back of the pack runner, it can be for a front of the pack runner, it can be for an old runner or a new runner. So final thoughts from Steph, or excuse me, sorry, husband. Final thoughts from Stephanie, and one piece of advice.
Final thoughts and a piece of advice. Final thoughts are, every time that I post a reel and it gets a lot of views and a lot of comments, I think that's my takeaway in sharing my experience of the USA Women's Marathon in Palm Desert was the number of runners who commented their stories of being moved to the sidewalk, or things being packed up, or aid stations being packed up, or the finish line being packed up when they reach there.
Yeah.
Like, that just tells me that I'm striking a chord that needs to be louder, and more people need to know about it. Like, what does a sweeper mean? Like, what are race experiences in the back of the pack? And so I think going back to that question about race directors, again, it's just like, I hope race directors are willing to listen to me. I have to give a shout out to Scott Abbott, who's executive race director for the California International Marathon. I became the very first 6-hour pacer for the California International Marathon in 2021. And there was kind of a little bit of a finish line fiasco in 2023, but Scott and I were able to talk on the phone for an hour. And I just really appreciated that Scott was willing to hear my perspective from a 6-hour pacer, and kind of put some things in place to better support, or to better communicate and clarify what that 6-hour cutoff time and what that means. And I appreciated hearing his perspective too, about how he has the city calling him and putting pressure on him to open up roads and things like that. I completely understand that the position of race director is extremely difficult, and I'm not going to pretend to know all the things, because I've never been in that position. Like, so final piece of advice for people who are listening in, and maybe they're nervous to show up to a starting line. They're worried about being that last runner. Like, I totally understand your fears, because I've been there, right? I went from non-runner to runner in 2011. I cannot believe that was already like 14 years ago. But like, I've been in your shoes, and I think that's why I feel so called to be a back of the pack pacer, and to provide that support and encouragement. But I encourage you, show up, because by and large, the running community is so supportive and encouraging for all runners. Show up for yourself, and you're going to be amazed at how your life is going to be changed by this sport. And so again, I have to give a shout out to Dawn and Dylan, because I'm sure they'll tell you that they are so proud of themselves for doing what seemed to be impossible at some point, but then they did it. They became marathoners. I mean, Dylan actually ran, her first marathon was in December, so just like month prior, and then her second marathon was in January, and then Dylan's actually going to be with me back at the LA Marathon in March. So Dylan has caught the marathon bug.
Oh, bad! She came down with it bad.
I love it. And I think Dawn is close behind too. So show up, and you're going to be amazed at how your life will change. And run with me too. So reach out to me on Instagram at RunStrongRun, or find me at RunStrongRun.com.
Yes.
And I'll send you my schedule, because I have so many people who say, I want you to be my pacer, which brings me so much joy, and I love that. So I will send you my schedule, and let's make it a plan to meet up. Another popular race that I pace every year is the Detroit Free Press Marathon in Detroit, Michigan, where you run across Ambassador Bridge into Canada, do a few miles in Windsor, Canada, and then cross back under the Detroit River on the underwater mile to go back into the United States. So I have several runners who are already planning to meet up with me in October in Detroit. So reach out to me. I'll send you my schedule, and let's make your marathon dreams a reality.
Awesome. I love that. Okay, one more time. What's your Instagram? And you're on YouTube as well, right? All right. So where can we find you?
So on Instagram, Run Strong Run. Also my website and blog, runstrongrun.com. And I just actually recently launched a course too, Interval Running for Beginners, starting smart and strong. So if you're looking to build your confidence and learn how to run using run walk intervals, you're a new runner, maybe you're returning from running after a break, injury, postpartum, what have you, that course is designed for you. We have a private private Facebook community also to provide you support and along that journey. So you can learn more at Instagram, Run Strong Run. I'm also on TikTok, Run Strong Run, and YouTube, of course, Run Strong Run. Oh, and the Run Strong Run podcast too, where I amplify voices from the back of the pack, sharing their inspiring stories, and also provide some tips and encouragement and inspiration on the run.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on here and for talking to me and telling me your story. And just like you said, amplifying these voices, because I want to amplify your experience as well. So what I'm going to do is ask people if you've had an experience like this, where it wasn't quite what you expected. Share your thoughts about marathon cutoff times below. Do you think that this should happen or should not happen? With that, you are listening to Behind the Bib and Stephanie Dunlap with Run Strong Run on Instagram, TikTok, podcast, website, and look for her to pace many, many races in your future. Reach out to her and she'll give you her schedule, and maybe she will be in your marathon future as well. With that, Stephanie, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. You didn't have to do this. You didn't have to come on here, but I appreciate you.
You've been listening to Behind the Bib with your host, Lisa Watkins. Real talk for every runner.